Alright, welcome to one of the lab portions of this course where we're going to start setting up our environments. We're going to be doing the Windows client in terms of the client machine, so what a typical user is going to be interacting with. We are going to do a normal VM. That is not going to be a part of the Active Directory environment yet. The reason for this is because it gives us the ability to access the machine itself, so we can actually do some troubleshooting as we're setting up our servers, just to make sure that, hey, maybe I do actually have a connection to this, so why doesn't DHCP work? So let's go ahead and do that, and I'll show you how to install a VM. I'm going to personally use VirtualBox. The presentation here uses VMware, just in case you want to use that. And then we're also going to go through and see how to download and run some of this software. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to get the Windows ISO from Microsoft. Now, fortunately, it is free. You do not need a key, and then they give you the ISO maker as well to actually do this. So first thing that we're going to do is, I've already clicked on this. I have that link ready. So double click on this if you're using the PowerPoint, or just copy and paste that URL into your browser that you typically use. And it's going to take you to this page. So if we come over here and then we go to download tool now, we're going to click on this. Okay. For me, it's going to be up here. Chrome has something closer to over here, I believe. So we're going to do this. We're going to open up this folder. I'm going to bring a File Explorer up. Okay, so now we're going to run this tool. Double click. Move this down. All right, terms and conditions, got to accept it if you want to use it, so accept. Spinny spin. Okay, so now that we're actually on this screen here, we do not want to upgrade this PC. We actually want to have this option selected, and then there's going to be another option that we're going to have to select to get to the ISO that we actually want, and I'm going to walk you through what each step means so you don't get confused, because a lot of students get tripped up on this. So we're going to hit next here. Okay, select the language and architecture. Make sure that even if this is grayed out, make sure that it's still right. So English, United States, that works. Okay, Windows 10, that works. Architecture, 64-bit, x64. So x86 would work here as well. You just don't want 32-bit if you're not on a 32-bit machine. So 32-bit for the most part has went by the wayside, but if you have a aging laptop, say from 2010, 11, 12, there is a possibility that you still have a 32-bit machine, and then you would need a 32-bit architecture. However, if you are on a 32-bit machine, you're going to struggle in this course in terms of hardware because you're limited to 4 gigs of RAM, and that's a problem. So if you have a machine like that, come find me if you're an Alfred State student, okay? So if this was wrong for some reason, and you're using a VPN that was coming out of Germany, and this came up as German, and you're actually American, undo this recommended for PC, and then go to English. But for us, this works. So we're going to go to next. And this is the part where people get confused on because they just click next all the way through. So what is happening here is this is saying that, hey, we will make a bootable drive for you. Go get your flash drive, make sure it's at least 8 gigs in size, and then we can make that bootable. Because we're doing a virtual environment, We do not want that. So we actually want this ISO file right here. Going to click next. Okay. Instead of, well, you can save this anywhere you want. I'm going to go to downloads because that makes sense to me. Name this whatever makes sense to you. I'm going to do Windows 10. And now we're downloading that ISO. It's going to take a little bit. The last time I checked, this ISO was 4 to 5 gigs. I don't exactly remember. So it's going to take a little bit depending on your internet connection. So let's give this a couple minutes and we will be back. Okay, now that it's done downloading here, it's going to ask you if you want to burn this to a DVD or you're trying to find that ISO file. I know that it's in my downloads folder. If you forgot for some reason, because it took a long time to download, right here is that path. So I'm going to close out of this now. Yes, I'm sure I want to quit. Okay, and now we're going to go back to the PowerPoint and finish up that presentation. Okay, so we do have a copy of that ISO. It's probably an old copy if you don't want to download it from Microsoft directly, but you're going to have to go to Russell, okay? And that's the same for the server edition of Windows that we're going to need for the next presentation and for the rest of the course as well. All right, so let's continue on here. Download your VM software of choice. VirtualBox is what I'm going to use. VMware Player is what a lot of students end up using, which is perfectly fine as well. With that said, if there is a confliction with your virtual switch, you're basically on your own for that. You can come and swing by, but we're limited on what we can do with a virtual switch with VMware, so I don't know how much I'll be able to help you, but I can help you troubleshoot it. So let's go ahead and bring up that browser again. Let's head over to VirtualBox, which I had that link ready. Okay, so if you haven't been on here yet, here are your hyperlinks that you want to click on first. So we're going to go to Windows Host. All right, we're going to save that file. Going to go back to downloads, pull this up, and then you're going to run this executable to install VirtualBox. Just hit next, and then move on with life with that. But I already have this installed, so I'm not going to do that. Make a note. I'm going to delete these. Here we go. Make a note of where your Windows 10 ISO is, and then put it in a spot that makes sense for you. Now I'm going to delete this. Oh, side note, this is 4.5 gigs, not 5. Side note, I'm going to delete this because I already have a virtual environment set up. I have my VMs down here, okay, and then I have an ISOs folder right here. So I'm going to be using this for my own setup, but you make your own setup, whatever makes sense for you. So let's go ahead and minimize this, and we'll continue on with the presentation. So again, like I said in the intro, I'm going to use the demonstration in virtual or VMware because a lot of students use VMware instead of VirtualBox. So create a new machine, okay, find that ISO file, okay, wherever you have it. It's not going to be, well, it might be an S drive, but I doubt it's going to be exactly this path, but go browse and find it. Configure your VM. I like this setting, virtual disk, as a single file, so I know exactly what to look for. I like 50 gigs or 60 gigs here. If you have the space, also make it dynamic, so you're not using all of that 60 gigs. A minimum of 32 gigs for Windows if you're going to use a desktop environment. If you're going to use a PowerShell environment, it's significantly less. Just make sure that you look at the spec if you are trying to save as much space as possible. configuring hardware. So we're going to customize hardware, and then we're going to get this screen down here. Memory of 2 gigs minimum. We're not going to be doing very much with these. The memory is starting out at 2 gigs. That's the minimum. If you want a good experience, it's 4 gigs. So 4096 here in megabytes. But again, if you're limited on RAM, go ahead and go 2 gig. You'll be all right, because we're not doing a whole lot of traffic here. But just know that typically a minimum of 4 gigabytes is what you want for a decent experience. So let's click on here. This is going to now install Windows, which I'm going to walk through here in a few minutes. And this is going to take a little bit depending on your hardware. So someone like me on my desktop, this isn't going to take very long. If you're rocking something a little bit older, this is going to take a little bit of time. So don't worry about it too much. If it seems like your machine is taking significantly longer than mine, I just have newer and more enthusiast level hardware than most laptops. So once you get through the install portion of Windows itself, it's going to reboot, and then you're going to go through the setup. The biggest thing that we need to do when you're going through the setup is pretty much self-explanatory, but when you get to this page, setup for personal use, and it sounds counterintuitive because we're setting up an enterprise environment for the course, but we'll come back and fix this later when we actually have Active Directory up and working. So personal use for now, and then we'll come back and fix it later on in the course. Alright, so that's the end of the presentation, so I'm going to go ahead and close this. Alright. VirtualBox. Okay. I'm going to come over here to New, which is right here. If you don't have exactly what this screen is showing, go ahead and go to Expert Mode. Right now this says Guided Mode for me, but it's in the same spot. Click on Expert Mode. We're going to name this Windows Client Group 1. Actually, let's go G1, C1. Or G1, C1. How about that? And then we'll do Windows 10. Okay, so this is going to be the naming scheme that I'm going to use for the rest of the course. Okay, machine folder, I'm going to change this to what I've been using the entire time. So C drive, VMs, and then I'm going to put it right here in the VM. There's that. So at 2 gigs, again, you're going to be fine. It's not ideal, but for the sake of the course and to show you that it actually does work, we're going to use 2 gigs. Okay, we're going to create a virtual disk. Okay, so create. Notice that it's the same name as what you gave it, which is fine. VDI, which is a virtual disk image, also fine. 50 gigs, okay? I'm going to leave it at 50 gigs. I'm also going to leave it at dynamically allocated. So it's only going to use what it needs, but if it needed updates for some reason, it has the space for the updates. Now, before we get that far, I'm going to make sure that it doesn't update, because I'm not going to give it network access, because we don't need those updates, and it's just going to take up space unnecessarily. So I'm going to hit create. Okay, we're going to minimize this. No? Okay, well, apparently we're not going to minimize that testing folder. So make sure we're using G1, C1. Come up here to settings. We're going to go to system. Alright, and we're going to move this hard disk up, move this optical disk up, and then we're going to turn floppy off. So this is your boot order, and for the time being we don't have anything on that hard disk, which again is virtual. So this is going to come up as nothing, and then it's going to move on to the optical disk. So That's a thing. Come over here to processor. Give your client at least 2 cores, like this. 2 cores. Uh, it doesn't matter if you over allocate. So if you have a quad core processor and you have 4 clients and you give them all 2 cores, technically you don't have enough cores, but because you can over allocate, you're going to be okay. So you definitely want those 2 cores on your VM, because Windows has a lot of background processes, and you're going to want that extra virtual core when you need it. So we don't need acceleration here. Display, we're going to enable 3D acceleration, then we're going to give video memory a little bit of boost here. Okay, storage, this is where we're going to have to set our boot optical disk. So come down here to where it says empty, and it has this disk over here. So we're going to click on this icon. We're going to choose a disk file. And now you have to navigate to where your ISO is that we downloaded a few minutes ago for Windows 10. I have this one here. I'm going to use that. Okay, audio, networking, we definitely need to change this. So right now, NAT, Network Address Translation, this would give us the ability to reach the internet with our VM. We will not be able to say if I had a different computer that I wanted to connect to this VM that we're about to create. I want to be able to do that with this protocol. We would need a dedicated NIC for that, which we can get into later if we need to, but for the time being, internal only. Actually, let's make this host only. We'll change that back to internal once we have a domain and we have a internal network that we actually can use. So enable network adapter. We're doing good here. Okay. We are all set, it would seem. So we're going to hit OK here. All right, and then we're going to start this. Bang. Okay, so resolution might be a little bit different on your machine. That is okay, but if it is small like this, you don't have much of a choice until you actually get into Windows and change it. So here's this. We're going to install now. Okay, I do not have a product key. If you have one, I wouldn't advise using it on a VM. So I don't have a product key. Okay, this is where we want Pro. All right. Home would probably work here, but just in case we need some RDP access to the client for some reason, just to prove that something works. Now we have it. If you have Pro and you're not going to enter the code anyway, so why not? Okay, we're going to come down to custom just to show you what a custom install actually looks like. Notice that we have our drive here, and it might be small for you guys, but this says 50 gigabytes. So this is the size that we told that virtual disk to be. Okay, make sure this is highlighted. Make sure that there's no error down here, which you shouldn't with a virtual disk. If you had a hard disk, you might have an error. If you do have that problem, let me know and we can help you. But click next here. And then we're going to install on this. This shouldn't take too long just because of the hardware that this is on. However, again, if you guys are rocking older hardware, this is going to take a little bit. Okay, now that we have the options up here, we're going to walk through them. So, United States, okay, that makes sense. US. That is fine. I do not want to add a second keyboard. An identified network. So down here is the, go away. There we go. So down here is the button of I don't have internet. So if you followed along with the network adapter and it was host only, you're not going to have internet. So let's go ahead and click on this. It's going to, yes, continue limited setup, but it's going to force you to make an account directly to the VM or directly to Windows, which is obviously not what Microsoft wants, but this is exactly what we want. So my naming scheme is going to be based on a Final Fantasy theme. So to keep me organized, I'm going to use different Final Fantasy concepts. In particular, for Group 1, I'm going to use Final Fantasy VIII. So the first one I'm going to use is Squall for a name. Super memorable password, so anything that works for you. Again, this is offline, so you don't necessarily have to worry about security. Although it is good practice to worry about security, even if you don't have to worry about repercussions. So, security questions. First pet name is most certainly Alfred. The city that I was born in, again, most certainly Alfred. And then childhood nickname, most certainly Alfred. Here we go. Sure, we'll set all the telemetry stuff. There's no internet, so it doesn't matter. No one cares about Cortana. Maybe someone does. Okay, so this is going to be a little bit on the setup procedure. Okay, so now that we're in our Windows environment, I would actually like to be able to see what is going on. So we're going to right click on anywhere in the blue. We're going to come down here to display settings. We're going to scroll, and instead of this 1024 by 768, we are going to go up to this one should work. Keep changes, and let's make it a little bigger. Okay, so this is what I'm stuck with at the moment, just because of how I got my setup going on. However, I'll fiddle with this later. So there's that. We're going to come over here. We're going to up the scaling on this to give us a fighting chance to actually see something. So instead of 100, let's bump this up to 175. Here we go. Okay, so that can go away. Do not care about you, Edge. Okay, so at this point, we have a operating Windows. So let's go ahead and open up CMD just to make sure that everything is good. Still says Squall, that is awesome. So IP config should give me a private address, and it does. So that means our DHCP is working within VirtualBox, and we are doing okay. So this is functioning. So one of the things that we do need to talk about at this point, if you're following along exactly with the course, is that we're going to have to make 3 more of these. So we need another group 1, so group 1 client 2. I'm going to need 2 more for group 2. So group 2 client 1 and then group 2 client 2. So I'm going to do that outside of the recording here, just so we don't make this video longer than what it has to be. I'd recommend manually doing it like we just did. If you are short on time, you can clone it, but basically all your settings are still going to say, well, whatever you named your computer. So for me, it'd be Squall for everything, and I have to go back through and change it, which, okay, not a huge deal. But other than that, if you got this far and you're doing okay and the Windows is working, you're all set. So what we'll be going over next time is how to install a server, Windows, obviously. And it's very similar with some little differences, but for the most part it's the same. It's just at that point we can start talking about how to actually set up environments. So with that said, I will see you in the next one.